My family used to call me a failure. Not once, not twice, constantly. I was the girl who didn't finish college, the one who never had a real job, the quiet shadow living in the basement of her own life. They never said it to my face with venom, but it was always there, hanging in the air like smoke. The comments at the dinner table, the way they'd glance at each other when I spoke, the subtle sighs every time I mentioned a new idea or dream. I got used to their smirks, the pity in their voices, the way my sister, Allison, would roll her eyes like I was a toddler speaking nonsense. To them, I wasn't just invisible, I was a disappointment dressed in silence. But I kept going, not because I wanted to prove anything to them, but because I knew deep in my bones that one day, the very silence they mocked me for would be the silence that shattered them. I didn't want their validation. I didn't want their approval. I just wanted to build something that was mine, quietly, fully, without anyone's permission. And that day came. I remember walking into her office building. It was just a business meeting. Nothing dramatic, at least not until her boss, Allison's own department head, looked up, blinked like he'd seen a ghost, stood up from his seat, and said 5 words that made my entire world flip. "It's an honor, CEO Bennett."
Oh, my God!
You should have seen her face. I was born Olivia Grace Bennett, second daughter, second priority, and very early on, I realized that in my family, second place didn't mean silver, it meant silence. Allison, my older sister, was a golden child wrapped in sunshine. She was the kind of kid who won every science fair, every math competition, every damn award they pinned on the school bulletin board. And when she walked across a stage, my parents stood so tall with pride you'd think they were watching royalty. I was not that child. I liked quiet things, drawing, reading, listening to music with my headphones on, volume low enough that I could still hear the world breathe. I didn't raise my hand in class. I didn't want to be noticed. I just wanted to feel enough. But in a house like mine, silence was mistaken for weakness. When I was 8, I won an art contest at school. It wasn't national or anything, just a local district prize. I came home beaming, clutching a crumpled certificate and a $5 gift card. I showed it to my mom while she was cooking. She gave me a half smile, said, "That's nice, honey," and turned back to the stove. 5 minutes later, Allison walked in holding a ribbon for perfect attendance. My dad stood up from the couch, clapped, and told her she was going to rule the world someday. I just stood there, invisible. That's the thing. No one hit me. No one screamed at me. But that doesn't mean there wasn't damage. Sometimes the absence of love hurts more than the presence of hate. I grew up with a quiet ache inside me, one I couldn't name, but felt in every room I entered. By the time I hit high school, I had learned my role. I stayed in the background. Let Allison shine. She got straight A's. I got B's and the occasional C. She was head of student council. I was the quiet girl who ate lunch in the library. And every time I brought home a test I was proud of, I was met with the same tired phrase, "That's fine. But you know your sister got a 98, right?" God, I hated that line. The more they compared me to her, the more I stopped trying. What was the point? I didn't want to compete. I didn't want to win. I just wanted to be seen. For once. Just once. I applied to an art college on the other side of the country. A small, liberal arts school with no name value and a barely there scholarship. My parents didn't even ask to tour it with me. They told me, flat out, that they wouldn't be helping me pay for it. If you wanted something serious, my dad said, you'd go into business or law like Allison. So I packed my things, bought a one-way bus ticket, and left without a hug. At first, I was okay. The campus was small, quiet, tucked between forests and rivers. I made friends soft-spoken people like me who didn't care about big careers or loud parties. For a while, I thought I had found where I belonged, but art school is expensive. And dreams, no matter how sincere, don't pay rent. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, skipped sleep, and still, it wasn't enough. I couldn't even afford my textbooks, and while I was drowning, Allison was posting pictures in Italy with her MBA cohort, drinking wine and posing next to fountains. The caption read, "Hard work pays off." I dropped out after 1 semester. No one called to ask why, not even my parents. It's like they expected it, like it was just another disappointment on a long list of letdowns. I found a room in a shared house with 2 strangers and a broken heater. The walls were thin, my mattress was a pile of blankets, and I didn't have a plan. I remember one night, I sat on the floor with a mug of hot water because I couldn't afford tea and just stared at my reflection in the window. My cheeks were hollow, my eyes were red, and for the first time in my life, I said it out loud. "I am not a failure." My voice cracked. I didn't believe it, but I said it again. "I am not a failure." That night, something changed. I didn't have a roadmap, no master plan, no trust fund or mentor or glowing recommendation letter. What I had was a busted old laptop I picked up for $60 from a pawn shop and a quiet, relentless hunger to not feel helpless anymore. It started small. One night, I stumbled onto a coding tutorial on YouTube. I had never even thought about programming before. The idea of building something that actually worked a web page, a function, an app felt like magic, like alchemy. I watched the whole video twice, then spent 6 hours trying to recreate what the guy did on screen. I failed miserably, but I was hooked. The next day, I watched another video, then another. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, Python. I didn't even understand what half the terms meant, but I kept going. I printed out cheat sheets and taped them to the wall. I practiced on free platforms and built ugly little websites that barely functioned. I messed up constantly, cried a few times, but I never stopped. And here's the thing, I was good at it. Not flashy good, not genius prodigy good, but quietly, steadily, unshakably good. I started doing small gigs logos, blog templates, UI redesigns. I charged less than everyone else because I was terrified people would think I was a fraud. But the work kept coming, slowly, then steadily, then suddenly. I never used my real name, not once. I created a business identity using my middle name and my mother's maiden name, Grace Monroe. That's what I went by online. Grace got 5-star reviews. Grace got repeat clients. Grace got invited to pitch on startup platforms and creative showcases. And no one, not my housemates, not my parents, not even Allison, knew it was me. Because I didn't want them to. I didn't want the pressure, I didn't want the judgment, and honestly, I didn't want the spotlight. I liked being invisible. It gave me space to build, to focus, to grow. While Allison was climbing the corporate ladder, networking at overpriced brunches, and bragging about her leadership retreats, I was working 12 hours a day from a folding chair in my tiny room, building an actual product. It started as a simple tool, an AI plugin that helps small businesses automate their design layouts. Nothing fancy, just smart code doing repetitive tasks. But the demand was instant. People didn't just like it, they loved it. I teamed up with a back-end developer I met in a coding forum. His name was Rafael, and he lived in Sao Paulo. We clicked immediately. He handled the server side. I handled the front end and UX. We worked like we'd known each other for years. 6 months later, we had a functional prototype. 9 months later, we were incorporated. And 1 year to the day after I dropped out of college, we launched a closed beta. We called it Formlight. It wasn't a revolution, it wasn't headline news, but it was ours. And within 2 weeks, We had more than 400 signups from small businesses around the country. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the analytics dashboard, watching the number climb. My hands were shaking, my chest tight. It was real. I built something real. And still, I told no one, not my parents, not my sister, not even my old friends. Part of me wanted to shout it from the rooftops, to throw it in their faces, to say, "See, I told you I wasn't a failure." But the other part, the deeper part, just didn't care about their applause anymore. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want validation. I wanted freedom. And I had it. I made enough to move into my own apartment, a quiet studio with big windows and a working heater. I got a second monitor, a proper desk. I drank tea instead of just hot water. And when I got my first real paycheck, $5,000 for a single contract, I bought myself a black wool coat I had wanted since I was 16. No logos, no designer flash, just quality, simple, elegant. Just like me. Meanwhile, back home, the Bennetts still thought I was floating, lost, drifting through temp jobs and disappointment. At Christmas, I flew home just to keep the illusion alive. My mother asked if I was still dabbling in painting. Allison told me there was a receptionist opening at her company I might be interested in. My father asked if I was dating anyone who could help me get back on track. I smiled. I told them I was just figuring things out. God, if only they knew. If you had asked me back then why I still visited home, I don't think I could have given you a clear answer. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was some dying ember of hope that one day they'd see me differently. Or maybe I was still that little girl, holding a crumpled art certificate, waiting for someone to say, "I'm proud of you." That hope died the night Allison threw me out of the house. It was a few months before everything changed. I had flown in for Mom's birthday. She loved family dinners, loved sitting at the head of the table like a queen, holding court while we all played our roles. Allison was the crown jewel. I was the awkward seat filler. That night was no different. She had just gotten a promotion director of client strategy at some finance firm. Everyone toasted. Dad gave a long speech about the kind of drive that turns dreams into reality. Mom cried. Allison beamed. And I sat there, quiet, smiling, pretending I hadn't just signed $1 million licensing deal 3 days earlier. Then came the moment that cracked it all open. Mom turned to me and said, "So, Olivia, what are you up to these days?" I paused, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I suddenly realized I had no desire to lie anymore. "I've been working," I said carefully. Allison laughed, a sharp, nasal sound. "Working at what I thought you said last time you were taking time for yourself." I didn't react. "I run a business." Another laugh, this one from my dad. "Is that what we're calling unemployment now?" The table erupted with chuckles. Even Mom smiled, though she tried to hide it behind her wine glass. I stared at them. For the first time in years, I looked at my family without emotion. No sadness, no yearning, just clarity. I opened my mouth to tell them everything. About Formlight, about the team, about the funding, about the deal I had just signed with one of the companies Allison's firm was dying to partner with. But before I could speak, Allison cut in. "Liv, don't do this. Just don't. You're not a businesswoman. You're an artist, and not even a good one." My mother's voice followed, soft, almost apologetic, but it cut deeper than any insult. "Sweetheart, it's okay. We all bloom in our own time. Just try not to compare yourself to your sister. You'll only end up disappointed." I stood up, calmly, pushed my chair back and reached for my coat. "Where are you going?" Dad asked. I looked at him, then at Allison, then back at Mom. "I was going to help you," I said quietly. I was going to offer Allison a job, a better one, with better hours, better benefits. I was going to bring her in as a director. Allison snorted. You were going to offer me a job. I nodded, but not anymore. That was when she lost it, her face twisted, eyes sharp and burning. Don't be ridiculous. You can't even pay your rent. Stop pretending like you're something you're not. You've always been a drain on this family, a shadow, a disappointment. You think showing up once or twice a year and acting mysterious makes you special? It doesn't. You're pathetic. For a moment, no one spoke. Then my mother stood, walked over to me, put a hand on my shoulder. I thought, God, for 1 second, I really thought she was going to defend me. She didn't. Her voice was quiet. I think it's best you leave. Olivia, you've caused enough stress tonight. I stared at her hand, then looked her in the eyes. I agree. I walked to the door. My fingers were shaking as I reached for the handle. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. Not this time. Allison's voice followed me into the hallway. Don't come back next year, you're not welcome here anymore. I didn't respond, I didn't turn around. I walked out into the cold December night, the porch light flickering behind me, and I felt something inside me snap. Not in anger, not even in heartbreak. It was freedom. They had kicked me out like I was trash, thrown away the only person who ever showed them mercy. And in doing so, they made one fatal mistake. They finally gave me permission to stop protecting them. They didn't know it yet, but the reckoning had already begun. After that night, I didn't go home, I didn't call, I didn't check in for birthdays, holidays, or those fake family group chats where everyone pretends we're some cozy sitcom clan. I cut the cord. For the first time in my life, I stopped hoping they'd change, stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. I stopped mourning the family I never had and started embracing the one thing they never expected me to become. A woman who didn't need them anymore. And just like that, everything moved faster. Formlight wasn't just surviving, it was growing, exploding. We closed our Series A with 2 major VC firms. We hired our first in-house engineers. Raphael flew in from Brazil for the first time, and we met in person at a coffee shop in Seattle like 2 war generals who'd built an empire through screens and sleepless nights. I finally stepped into the role I had created in Silent CEO. It felt surreal, not glamorous, not at all, but solid. Right, like putting on a coat that finally fit. I still didn't broadcast it. No LinkedIn announcement, no Instagram post, no glossy headshots. I didn't need an audience. I just needed the work. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. 3 months after being thrown out of my parents' house, I received an email from our legal team. They were finalizing a strategic acquisition, buying out a smaller firm that had been quietly struggling for months. That firm was a white-label analytics agency that provided back-end tools for marketing departments. Guess who their biggest client was? Allison's company. I stared at the screen. My coffee went cold in my hands. At first, I thought it was some cosmic joke, but then the reports came in spreadsheets, projections, client portfolios. Her department, her accounts, her entire workflow, all of it depended on the tools we were about to absorb. Oh my God. I didn't plan this. I swear. I didn't. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel the poetic weight of it pressing against my chest. This wasn't revenge. This was justice by accident. A few weeks later, I was scheduled to attend a partner integration meeting at their headquarters. It was routine, just a quick presentation to their team leads and managers about onboarding with our systems. I usually delegated these kinds of meetings to our directors, but this time, I chose to go myself. I didn't tell anyone why. The morning of the meeting, I wore the black wool coat, the same one I bought with my first real paycheck. No flash, no label, just quiet power. My hair was pinned back, no makeup, no rings or jewelry, just me and the truth I was finally ready to let speak for itself. The elevator ride up felt like rising through time. 10 floors, each one peeling back layers of old memories, old wounds. By the time the doors opened, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was calm. I walked into the glass conference room with our lead counsel by my side. Half the table was already filled. I saw Allison before she saw me. Her back was straight, her laptop open, her mouth moving a mile a minute as she gave instructions to her team. Classic Allison, always the loudest voice in the room. Then she looked up and froze. The color drained from her face like water down a sink. I took my seat at the head of the table, set my notebook down, and smiled. "Good morning, everyone," I said. "Let's get started." Allison blinked, trying to reassemble herself. Wait, what is she doing here? The man next to her, the department VP, turned and said, "Ms. Bennett is here to walk us through the onboarding. She's leading the transition." Allison stared at him like he had grown two heads. She's leading it. And then the moment came. The VP turned toward me with a professional smile and said the words I'll never forget. "It's an honor, CEO Bennett. Thank you for coming in personally." Dead silence. I didn't look at Allison. I didn't have to. I could feel the shift in the room like a drop in barometric pressure. Chairs creaked. Pens stopped moving. Her breath hitched in her throat, and for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. No cutting remark. No snide laugh. Just shock, pure, raw, unfiltered disbelief. I continued the meeting like nothing had happened. I went through the numbers, the tools, the migration process. I took questions. I handled objections. And all the while, Allison sat there, barely breathing. It was surgical. It was clean. And it was the most powerful moment of my entire life. When the meeting ended, everyone filed out except her. She stayed frozen in her seat, staring at me like I had risen from the dead. I gathered my things, walked past her. Then I paused. "By the way," I said, my voice low and steady, "the director position you mocked that night? It's already been filled. But if you ever want to interview for a lower-level role, you're welcome to apply." I didn't wait for her response. I walked out. And this time, I didn't look back. The fallout wasn't immediate. Allison didn't call me that day, didn't message, didn't show up outside my office with some rehearsed apology. No. She did what she always did, pretend like nothing had happened. Like maybe if she stayed quiet long enough, the truth would crawl back into the shadows where it used to live. But truth doesn't shrink. It echoes. By the end of the week, word had already spread, not just in her company, but across the industry. Tech blogs started whispering about the mysterious CEO behind Formlight, the woman who had built $1 million product without legacy funding, without fame, without noise, just brilliance and silence. And then someone found my name. A quiet profile on a founder's forum, no photo, no glam, just the title Olivia G. Bennett, CEO, Formlight Technologies. My inbox exploded. So did my parents' phones. I don't know who told them first. Maybe one of Dad's golf buddies. Maybe Mom overheard it at church. Maybe Allison herself finally cracked and said it out loud. But it didn't matter. They knew. And suddenly, the girl they threw out like trash became the daughter they desperately needed to talk to. It started with a text from Mom, just one sentence. Why didn't you tell us? Not congratulations, not we're proud of you, just confusion, shock. Like somehow, I had betrayed them by becoming something they never imagined. I didn't reply. The next day, Dad called, left a voicemail. His voice was shaky, uncertain, so different from the condescending baritone I'd grown up with. Olivia, listen, your mother and I were just surprised, that's all. We didn't know. We want to talk. We want to understand. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. A few days later, a letter came in the mail, handwritten, from my mother. She hadn't sent me a handwritten note since I was in 3rd grade. It was 4 pages long. She talked about how proud they were deep down, how they didn't mean to be harsh, how it must have hurt when they compared me to Allison. She even included a photo from when I was 5 years old, holding a paintbrush, grinning from ear to ear. At the bottom she wrote, "You've always been gifted, we just didn't see it." I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into a drawer. Still no reply. I wasn't being cruel. I just didn't owe them anything anymore. And Allison. She finally cracked. It started with a message request on LinkedIn, of all places, just 2 words, "Can we talk?" I ignored it. Then came the email, a long one. She said she was sorry, said she had been under pressure for years, that she felt like she was carrying the weight of the family, and it made her cruel. She said she always thought I was soft. And that scared her because deep down, she knew I was smarter, more capable. But she couldn't accept that, not when the entire family had placed her on a pedestal. She ended with this line, "You didn't just build a company, you built a version of yourself I can't even recognize, and I'm terrified I'll never catch up." That one stayed with me. Because for the first time she sounded human. But still I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because just 1 week after that email, Allison was quietly removed from her position. Not because of me. I didn't ask for it. I didn't push for it. But the leadership team had begun reevaluating their internal structure, and her performance no longer measured up. They gave her 2 months severance and an NDA. Just like that, the golden child's career imploded. And as much as a part of me wanted to celebrate, wanted to scream karma from a rooftop, I didn't feel joy. I felt sad. Because what they never understood is that I never wanted to beat them. I just wanted to belong. But now, I belonged to something bigger. A life I had built from scraps and silence. And no amount of apology or regret could rewrite that story. One morning, I was sitting by the window in my apartment, my real home now, watching the rain tap against the glass when Raphael messaged me. "Forbes wants to interview you." I laughed, out loud, alone. The girl who used to eat canned beans in the dark was about to be featured in a magazine her mother kept stacked on the coffee table for guests. Unbelievable. I didn't agree to the Forbes interview. Not because I wasn't honored, I was, but because it didn't feel necessary. I didn't build this life for headlines. I didn't claw my way through the dark just to bask in artificial light. I built it for me. For the girl who used to whisper, "I am not a failure," in the quiet hours of a freezing apartment. For the version of myself that no one ever clapped for. That's who I owed everything to. Instead, I sat in silence and watched my company grow. We crossed 100,000 users, then 200. Investors called, journalists called. A streaming service even reached out about developing a docuseries, but I didn't say yes to any of it. Because the more noise there was around me, the more I craved peace. There's something no one tells you about finally achieving the thing they said you never would. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief, like You start to mourn all the versions of yourself who suffered unnecessarily, who begged for crumbs of affection, who lived half alive just to make others comfortable. You realize how much of your life you spent waiting for permission to breathe, and when you finally exhale, it's not triumph, it's sorrow. I began writing again. Not code, not contracts, just thoughts, on paper, the old school way, pen and ink and late night honesty. I filled notebook after notebook with things I'd never said out loud. Like how I used to lie about having friends just so mom wouldn't feel embarrassed when she talked to the other moms at church. Or how I used to sit outside Allison's bedroom door, listening to her joke with boys on the phone, wondering what it would feel like to be adored like that. Or how, for years, I believed love was a reward I hadn't earned yet. God, writing those words broke something in me, but it also set me free. Because here's the truth, I didn't just outgrow their expectations, I outgrew their power. Their voices, the ones that used to haunt me like shadows, had no weight anymore. Not because they stopped speaking, but because I stopped listening. And in that silence, I found myself not the version they wanted, not the version I pretended to be, but the real one, the one who didn't need applause to feel valid, the one who didn't need to prove her worth to be worthy. I started mentoring girls online, quiet girls, awkward girls, girls who reminded me of me. Some of them lived in towns no one could pronounce. Others were in shelters, or refugee camps, or foster care, but they all had that same look in their eyes, the one I used to see in the mirror. The look of someone trying so hard to disappear that they forgot how to dream. I didn't tell them to be louder. I told them to be real. Because this world doesn't need more people performing strength. It needs people who survived without anyone noticing. The quiet warriors, the invisible architects. The girls like me. Sometimes, I still think about that dinner. The night Allison told me I was pathetic. The night my mother told me to leave. And I thank God for it. Because that was the moment everything broke. And when everything breaks, you finally get to choose what you rebuild. The letter came on a Tuesday. No warning, no text beforehand, just an envelope on my doormat, hand addressed in looping cursive I hadn't seen in years. It was from Allison. I held it in my hands for a long time, long enough for the tea in my mug to go cold. Part of me wanted to rip it open, to finally see what she had to say. Another part wanted to burn it, unopened, because sometimes the wounds you cover up so carefully don't deserve to be touched again. But I read it, slowly, line by line. She didn't beg. She didn't try to explain everything away. For once, there were no excuses, no performance. She wrote that losing her job shattered her ego in ways she didn't know were possible, that every morning felt like a mirror cracking, that people had stopped looking at her with admiration and started looking at her with pity, and for the first time in her life, she felt invisible. Then she wrote this. I think that's what you felt all along. Live. Invisible. And I'm so sorry. I don't think I ever knew how loud I was until I realized how quiet I made you feel. I stopped there, just froze. She continued. She told me she envied me. Not just now, with the company and the success, but even before, back when we were kids. She envied how I didn't need the crowd, how I could sit in a room by myself and still be whole. She wrote, You didn't build Formlight to prove anything. You built it because it's who you are, and that terrifies me. Because all this time, I've been trying to build someone I thought people wanted, while you became someone they couldn't ignore. She ended the letter with 7 words I never thought I'd hear from her. I was wrong about you. Forgive me. I read it 3 times. Then set it down on the windowsill and stared out at the rain. There was a time when I would have given anything to hear those words. A time when I would have cried, clutched that letter to my chest like salvation, and run back into her arms without hesitation. But now I wasn't that girl anymore. Forgiveness is strange. People talk about it like it's a door you either open or keep shut, but it's more like a window. Sometimes you crack it open, let some air in. Sometimes you shut it again. And sometimes you realize the window isn't even in the same room you live in anymore. I didn't hate Allison. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want distance. I just wanted space to keep growing without the weight of the past trying to reattach itself to me. So I wrote back. Not a letter, just a short message. Thank you. That means more than you know. I wish you well. That was it. No promises, no reunion, no big tearful climax. Just a clean line between what was and what is. She replied with a heart emoji, the digital equivalent of a quiet nod. And then, nothing else. We didn't become friends. We didn't suddenly become sisters again. But something changed. The air between us cleared. The pain settled. The fire that once burned between us had cooled into something softer, something like peace. And for the first time in my life, I felt unburdened. Not victorious, not vindicated. Just free. It was a crisp morning in October when the invitation came in. A nonprofit tech summit in San Francisco wanted me to speak. Not about Formlight's growth, not about software, but about resilience, about failure, about silence, about the quiet ones. I almost said no. Public speaking still made my stomach turn. I wasn't a stage person. I didn't thrive under spotlights or bask in applause. But something about this felt different. Like maybe this wasn't about me anymore. So I said yes. The night before the event, I stayed in a hotel overlooking the bay. I couldn't sleep. I paced. I went over my speech again and again in my head. But every time I rehearsed, it felt wrong, scripted, stiff. So I stopped rehearsing. And I decided that when I stepped onto that stage, I would speak like I was sitting across from the girl I used to be, the one with the art ribbon that no one clapped for, the one who thought she had to stay small to keep the peace. The auditorium was full, hundreds of faces, cameras, lights, applause, and when I stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand, it all went quiet. I took a breath. And I began. I used to think I was born broken. That was my opening line, and you could feel the room shift. I told them everything, not the numbers, not the accolades, the truth. I told them about the dinner table silence, about being compared to someone louder, shinier, more lovable, about how I once cried over a $5 gift card because it was the only recognition I had ever gotten, about the night I whispered to myself, I am not a failure, and how I didn't believe it, but said it anyway. I told them how I built a company not for fame, but for freedom, how I stayed anonymous because power, to me, never meant being seen. It meant never needing to be. And then I looked straight into the audience and said, if you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the one they forgot, the one they overlooked, the one they called a disappointment, this is for you. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to be loud to be strong. Sometimes, silence is not weakness. Sometimes, it's armor. Sometimes, it's the space where genius grows. I paused. People were crying. Even I had to swallow the lump in my throat before continuing. They called me a failure. I said, they kicked me out of their house. But what they didn't know was that I had already built my own. The applause was thunderous. But what stayed with me most wasn't the clapping. It was what came after. A young woman barely 20 came up to me after the event. Shy, tearing up. She said, "I'm studying computer science. Everyone says I'm wasting my time, that I'm not smart enough, that I don't have the personality for it. But now, I think maybe I do." I looked at her and smiled. "You don't need a different personality." I told her, "You just need to stop believing them." As I walked back to my hotel, I thought about everything: the house I was thrown out of, the letters, the silence, the victory, the grief. And I realized something. I never wanted revenge. I just wanted the truth to have its moment. And it did. So if you're listening to this, and you've been made to feel small or invisible or less than, I want you to remember something. You are not a failure. You are a fire they tried to smother with doubt. And one day, when you rise and they won't know what hit them. They'll look at you, stunned, breathless, shaken. And all you'll have to say is, "Hello, I'm the CEO.